Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is Deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On this show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, franchising, and more. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest Podcast. Let's get started. After obtaining a BA in accounting, Joe Miller has been investing in rental properties since 1978 and flipping houses since 1991. By the way, he's done this during a long stretch of being a mobile DJ. We're going to talk about that. He has also served in numerous leadership roles in professional and personal circles, and he teaches real estate investing at both the beginner and advanced levels. He's a hard money lender to other investors, as well as a trusted mentor, author, podcast guest, and benefactor to his community. And he's also the author of the best-selling book, Build Real Estate Wealth, Enjoy the Journey of Rental Property Investment. Joel, welcome to the podcast.
Corey, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
So listen, I'm excited to talk to you about all these aspects. You know, our audience is, we have some folks who focus on real estate investing, but a lot of them are entrepreneurs and business owners and leaders who invest in addition to whatever their main thing is. Plus, we haven't talked about in detail the hard money lending field. So I want to talk about that. And, you know, I want to talk about how you did all this during a stretch of decades being a mobile DJ. But before we get to all of that, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because I'm guessing a hard money lender, author, real estate investor, and maybe even mobile DJ wasn't it back then, but you tell me.
Well, actually, 1.5 of those things was on my radar.
Okay.
Didn't think about hard money lending or, authoring a book or anything like that. But 2 things did happen to me in junior high school that really set me down my path. And that was, number one, an investor built 4 4-unit apartment buildings on my paper route, which was at the edge of our subdivision. And first I got all those tenants on my paper route per customer. So that was good. And I kind of, we all lived in this with our parents in a single family home. And this rental thing was something a little new to kind of think about. So I distinctly remember in junior high, like going to my bedroom and saying like, okay, how's this rental thing work? And I'm like doing the math and I'm saying, I see these people are going to pay the guy that owns this more than it costs him to own it. And, he just keeps operating it. They move in and out and in and out. And so I kind of stuck that in my back pocket. And I did make that decision early on that at some point I wanted to invest in rental property. So that's one of the 1.5. The other half is that one of the older kids in the neighborhood built a pirate radio station in their basement. And I got to hang out there. And, had a flagpole in the back of the backyard for the antenna and all that. And I made a decision that I wanted to be a disc jockey then, but I assumed it was going to be on the radio. So I actually did some radio production work in high school. And then when I went to college, I went to a college that had a really good campus radio station you could work at. And I studied accounting, because I knew you could use accounting in any business that you went into,
Sure.
And so I did then work my way through college at commercial radio stations. And just before I graduated, I went full time at a big radio station here and where I'm from, and I had been trying to get the job at ever since I was in high school. And so that meant being full time that I could accept the invitations from the kids that would call from the high schools to come out and do what they called sock hops in their gyms, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so I did my first one and it changed my life. I made $75, but I quickly found out I could charge more than that. In fact, I could make more money than I was making all week at the radio station. And so I pioneered the mobile DJ business in this. I left the radio and I pioneered the mobile DJ business in this part of the country, which is northwestern Pennsylvania. I'm in Erie, which is like halfway between Cleveland and Buffalo and directly north of Pittsburgh. So I covered that whole area in there. So that's the half. I knew I wanted to be a DJ, but I didn't know it was going to be a mobile DJ. So I did that for 35 years, 5,051 appearances, and I retired from that in 2011. But I bought my first rental property in 1978, not long after I was on my own doing the mobile DJ work. And that, I think, is a good thing to point out to your audience, because my book is to a large degree written for people who don't think real estate is for them necessarily, or they're wondering how they could add it to something that they already have going, some other business that they're passionate about. Like I was passionate about the mobile DJ business. I wanted to be a full-time entertainer. And if I hadn't have done that, I probably would have done more in real estate and been further along, but I didn't want to. I wanted to be what I was doing, as a DJ. And I think a lot of people are like that. They don't really want to give up a good job or a career, but they understand that rental real estate can not only increase your income along your journey while you keep your job or whatever, but also bolster your retirement when you're all done with that. So in fact, after I did retire in 2011, I started investing more in real estate, and then eventually became a hard money lender. And I just started that in 2018, and that's actually been the best business I've ever been in. I really enjoy helping the other investors who are earlier in their journey. I'm providing the funding for their rentals or their flips. And as you mentioned, I did start flipping houses along the way. I flipped over 100 houses. And then when I had a little extra time on my hands and COVID, I started taking down notes. And all of a sudden, I've got this book later,
Right. So the second question I always ask in the podcast, you sort of previewed a little bit, which is, or maybe you previewed, which is, what was your first deal of any type? So what was it, that first rental property that you bought back in the 70s while you were still doing the mill?
Well, my first deal was probably selling accident insurance for 15 cents extra a week to the people on my paper route. Or maybe finding a new customer on the paper route.
I love it. Talk about that first real estate investment.
How did you real estate investment?
Yeah.
I bought a 2-unit that I immediately turned into a 3.
Okay.
Because it had 4 bedrooms on the first floor. So we took one of the bedrooms and made it a bath, and ended up with a, 2-bedroom, 1 bath, and a 1-bedroom efficiency on the first floor. And that was the beginning. I actually still own that property.
Wow.
47 years later, and it's a cash cow. Has 3 garages behind it, 3 units, and it's crazy. That was actually, I will tell you, that is the first and the last property that I ever bought that was listed on the multi-list. So every property I have purchased since then has been an off-market deal.
Off-market, right?
Dozens and dozens and dozens of them.
Right.
I will tell you, for some of those flip properties, I did buy them at an auction. In some cases, the realtor that I was working with did bring me a few deals. I wasn't out looking for it. She'd just say, just check this out and we'll buy. And she would do that because I always sold my properties through the realtor.
Right.
With a few exceptions. Sometimes somebody would approach me while we were still working on a property and say, hey, when you're done with this, I want to buy it, that kind of thing.
So I want to stick with that first one for a second, because you did say, hey, you had this experience where, on your paper, they built this, and you saw it even as a young person, started calculating the math on it. But, making that jump to make that first investment, talk to me about that journey. Like how did you learn how to do that? Right.
It is nothing like the journey now, when we have the internet and all kinds of seminars and conferences and gurus and all that. I was reading hardback books by guys like Al Lowry, educating myself for like a couple years, before I actively was looking for a property. And I was getting so interested in this. I was still living at home with my parents, and they wanted me out of there. So one day my mother finds an ad in the classified section of the newspaper that an apartment complex was looking for a resident manager. She thought, this would be great. It's something he likes to do, and I can get him out of the house, So I actually got that job the same month that I bought my first property. I was already waiting for the closing on this property when this job came up. They hired me. So in 1 month, I went from 0 to 99 units, 96 units in the apartment complex and 3 of my own. And I was off to the races. And I didn't stay real long managing that apartment complex. Less than a year, I was building my DJ work and buying my own properties and so on. So the journey was literally that I was reading those books and I was buying the tape courses from the late night real estate gurus who were selling tape courses that came in a binder with a manual to follow along while you listen to their cassette tapes.
Yeah.
I just threw them out a couple of years ago, but I had shelves full of those things, and I still have about a 3 or 4 inch 3-ring binder notebook of all the notes that I took while I was listening. And I'd listen to them multiple times, listen to them while I'm driving, listen to them while I'm home, and I'd take my notes and then I'd organize my notes. And all this binder I still have has about 25 different tabs on this side for what they talk about what I've got the information about on a few notebook pages behind each tab, whatever subject, to separate it so that I could refer to it easily. And I referred to it when I wrote my book.
It was great. And I'm going to circle back to the book, but I want to talk about this conversation of the fact that you were, first of all, most of the people I know who did any DJ business didn't do it for decades, right? They might have done it for 5 or 10 years and then they
didn't do it full time. I was one of the few full-time professional mobile disc jockeys in this part of the country.
Wow. So now, and this, it relates to what you talked about in the book. So how did you, on the one hand, it's great to have this opportunity to diversify your investments, to look at other things, whether you're, most of our audience is entrepreneurs and business owners, so they have a primary business, or, if you're an executive or employee somewhere else, to have these alternative sources of income, et cetera. But also, right, it's, there are some challenges that definitely come up, right? You got your main business or job, you got family, you got whatever. And now, you have this other thing that you need to focus on. How did you manage to balance all that with all the real estate investing you did? Did you have other professional management involved? Did you build a team? Was it all on your own? Like, tell us about that journey of doing both.
Well, first of all, in my instance, since the commitments for the DJ work was primarily in the evenings and weekends, it did leave me during the day, during the week, to work on properties. Now, I recognize that a lot of people are stuck if they want to keep their career working during the day, during the night. But so they would be forced to do more things in the evening or on the weekends, for messing around with properties, looking at properties, showing properties. So I have never used third-party management on any of the properties. I've always been able to manage things myself. But it's just a balancing act that you have to figure out for your own life, and for some people, they're willing to really hit it hard because it's their objective to leave their full-time work ASAP. And, we talk about that, but that's not always the case. So as far as balancing goes, it was something I just had to work out. And because I was determined I did not want to use third-party management.
Yeah. That's especially interesting because a lot of the folks I know who, especially if it's not their full time, even if it is, they use third-party management. So that's interesting. So at least one more question just on the direct real estate investing side. Then I want to talk about the hard money lending in the book more. So tell us, listen, I'm sure you've been very, very successful. I don't know a successful investor, entrepreneur, business owner, whatever, who hasn't had a deal that went wrong. What are the mistakes, where did one go wrong and what should that teach people about what to watch out for in terms of what not to do?
Well, the real estate deal that went wrong the most for me was the one time that I bought a fairly large commercial property with 2 other partners. Actually, that partnership already existed, and the managing partner of that partnership had basically put this deal together and run the conversion that went on in that building from a department store into an office building, and taken in these other 2 partners. And then the managing partner wanted out. And so I already knew all 3 of these guys, and they asked me if I would replace him as the managing partner by buying into the partnership.
Okay.
And within that was like in September of one year. And by November, the tenant that had the 51% of the space, in other words, basically our anchor tenant, went bankrupt.
Wow.
And then almost the same month, the restaurant that had another 25% also went bankrupt. First, Chapter 11. So we had to deal with keeping them there under a renegotiated lease, had to let the restaurant give up the banquet space and try to turn that into something else. And finally ended up condominiumizing the building so that we were trying to sell off the office spaces in there. And this went on for 10 years of trying to put that fire out. And in the end, I gave my interest to the other two guys.
Wow.
Just to be out of it,
Right.
So the lesson I learned there was, especially regarding commercial material investments, commercial property, that it's a good idea to do a little more investigation than what I did of the tenants that you're going to inherit there.
Yeah.
I think the prior managing partner had some inkling that these two businesses were going to go south, and this guy was actually one of the main car dealers in our area and a very successful businessman and known for his timing. So I think that's what was going on. And I was too green to, realize that I didn't do this. Was 1988. I was in my mid 30s, and now I will tell you though, there is a silver lining to this story.
Okay.
Because one of our tenants was a real estate brokerage, a branch of one of the larger brokerages. And I would keep an extra set of keys at this place in case I showed up at the building and decided I needed to do something and I didn't have my giant key ring with me, not something you want to keep in your pocket. And so I would have to go in there and ask for my extra set of keys. And the cute blonde that was the keeper of the keys became my wife.
Aha. Yeah, listen, I'm definitely a believer. Sometimes, the universe or God or whatever framework you want to say, you're like, there's a reason something happens that's not what you think it was.
Right.
So, yeah. So,
and so if you ask me, am I sorry I did that deal? No.
Right.
No.
Just a different kind of ROI on that deal, not
right.
financial.
Now, unfortunately, it also, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to say it, it's just more of an observation, is that was such a large deal and such a big spanking, so to speak, that I actually did not ever pursue commercial real estate after that.
Yeah.
Because I realized that the difference between commercial real estate and residential real estate is that with residential, you have little problems all the time,
Right.
And they're easy to handle and so on. When you have commercial real estate, especially when you have things like anchor tenants, you have no problem at all, especially if they're triple net leases as ours were for a long period of time. And then when you have a problem, you have a big problem.
Yeah.
So that just changed my type of property I looked for after that point.
Yeah. And it's really interesting on that, right? Because there are other people who would say, there are many people who started in residential, moved to commercial. And, I've heard people say, and there's no right or wrong. It's just what,
right.
what makes sense for you. That, like this, you need so many singles to be successful in residential, but you can have home runs and grand slams, on, whatever, or you don't have the everyday headaches that you got to deal with, with commercial, whatever. But you're right. It's, it's a trade-off, there's benefit and detriments to each approach.
There's no right or wrong about it. I'm not saying, hey, everybody avoid commercial property. That's not my message. I'm just saying that that's an example of how something that happens to you with a certain type of property can shape the way you move forward. I'm not sorry that I never invested in rental property or commercial property, but I will say that I think as the years went by, if I would have had a better opportunity, I wouldn't have turned it down. It just didn't end up being my path.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest Podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to CoreyCupfer.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic, deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show. So let's get into the book a little more, and then I want to move to the hard money lending side. So, pandemic hits, you, like all of us to some degree, have significant change, maybe some more time, other things you can't do. Talk to us about, other than just having available time, what was the motivation to write the book?
Well, I have to say right off, the part of the motivation is that I have a young son. He is now 19, and of course he was just in the middle of his teens whenever I was thinking about this. And so considering that he was expressing interest in following in what I had done, a lot of the motivation was to write it for him.
Mm.
So I wrote this book like I was trying to instruct my son. And that's something that anybody's thinking about buying the book should realize, that this is written in a tender way and in an organized way and a really informative way, the same way that I would want my own kid to learn about how to invest in real estate.
Mm.
So
and for me, the subtitle said, all right, build real estate wealth. I mean, there are a lot of books that talk about getting wealthy in real estate, but I love that you put enjoy the journey of rental property investment. Like the enjoying the journey part is crucial to that, right?
Yeah, because if you don't enjoy it, you probably won't stick to it. And this is a sort of thing where nothing's going to happen unless you take action, of course. But action isn't enough. It's commitment to get you to follow through that will bring you the success. And if you don't enjoy it, you're going to give up on your commitment. So my theory is that education and knowledge of how to do stuff and keeping calamity out of your process is what will help you enjoy it. And in other words, if you know what you're doing, you can enjoy it a little.
Yeah, love that. So take us through what are some of the, so keeping in mind that the audience seems like it's a great fit for part of the intention of the book, which was to say, hey, this is an opportunity for folks that, like you, right, have a main gig, right, potentially. What are some of the key things that people can learn from the book?
Well, it's kind of becoming what is called the big book on rental properties. In fact, we ended up putting that on the cover. It's the big book on income properties because it's becoming sort of like the new go-to resource for changing your life with rental properties. And, reviewers are saying this is not the kind of book that you buy and read and say, oh, that was great. And you put it on your shelf and you never really look at it again.
Yeah.
This is the kind of book you buy and you park it on your desk because you're going to keep referring to it.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's for established investors that want to supercharge portfolio they already have, but it's also for beginners or even for people who don't think that real estate is for them, and or people that are trying to figure out how to add it to what they've already got going on, like we were talking about earlier. And here's why. It's because it contains all the information that you need to not only get started, but to maintain a rental property business, because it covers everything starting with mindset, which is very important, no matter what business you're going into. That I realize not everybody in your audience is or wants to be a real estate investor, but this covers a lot about mindset. And the next thing it covers is forming your entity that you want to have before you actually start making offers, So, and then finding, negotiating, financing deals, preparing a property for renting it or selling it, if it's going to be a flip. Covers finding tenants and managing your property. It covers tax implications and running your office, preparing financial statements in order to look good for lenders. Really good chapter on that, because I'm all about, how do you, through my accounting background, how do you prepare this to keep it so that the people that are making decisions about your financial future at that bank's underwriting department are really going to see the full picture. Talks about the difference, understanding the difference between riches and wealth. Two different things. It's like the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is the facts. Wisdom is how to do the right things with the facts. Riches is just having the money. Wealth is when you are doing the right thing with the money, that kind of thing. I've got things in there about best practices for keeping calamity out of your business and your personal life. I'm all about heading off calamity at the pass and not just putting out fires after you've already messed up. It's how to not have the calamity in the first place. And there's bonus material in there on house flipping. Now, the book is primarily about income property, both commercial and residential, but I have a chapter in there about house flipping. And then at the end of that chapter, there's a QR code that if you followed the link you get when you open that, it takes you to the how-to of house flipping. I just decided I wasn't going to put the how-to stuff in the book to keep it strictly on the rental stuff, but it describes what house flipping is about. So no one should think for a moment that a seasoned investor reading this book would not get, game-changing information out of it, because it's there. And the reason why is it contains like over 150 checklists for everything from tenant screening questions to negotiating deals to doing due diligence on property. And then even the tools you need to just be even minorly involved with some repairs and so on. But here's the thing. Ron LeGrand, the guru, Ron LeGrand reviewed the book, and he wrote that he wishes he would have had my book when he was getting started.
That's phenomenal. That is phenomenal. It's one of the things I love when I did look through is that, it's not, first of all, I love that you started with mindset, and I want to come back to that in a second.
Yeah.
But you go from the mindset to, all of these checklists, all these practices. And it's why you say it's not a book you read and put aside. It's really a resource guide. It's one you're going to go back to over and over again, right? It's one that old school people like me, I do read a lot of books on Kindle these days, but, in the old school, this is where I would have put, Post-it notes with little tabs or doorhead the pages to go back to them. Or, if you're doing it on Kindle, you can highlight it these days. But
and I would mention it is also available as an ebook.
Yeah. So, it really is a phenomenal resource. And I will let people hopefully listen, audience, if you have any interest in this, you should go to buy the book and really use those checklists. I'm not going to have Joel sit here and read through checklists for you, right? Go buy the book. But what I want to do here from you, because my audience knows, anybody's listening to this podcast at all, I'm a huge mindset guy, right? I, like you, believe everything starts with mindset, right? You can have the best checklists and information in the world, but if your mindset's not right, you're not going to be successful. So let's spend a few minutes on the mindset side of it. What are some of the key, mindsets or mindset shifts that have to happen for somebody to be successful in rental income investment?
Let's start with talking about the three main reasons why people don't invest in rental property.
Yep.
The first is that they have some preconceptions of like rental property being all about bad tenants and broken toilets, things like that.
Yeah.
So we covered talking about how to select tenants, because the better you are at selecting tenants, the better the tenants are. And so
Right.
the less that first thing is, your fear of interacting with tenants, the less that's going to be a problem. You can have the skills for finding deals, negotiating deals, fixing up property, and be good at all that. But if you're not good at selecting tenants, you're not going to have a good time, in this business. And then we cover a lot of things about repairing things, or actually talk a lot about how you don't have to know how to do everything. You just have to know who to call.
Yes.
And, and you shouldn't be afraid to do that. So obviously we talk about the mindsets that you need to have when you are interfacing with what I just mentioned, contractors.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, that's part of the mindset, is understanding those preconceptions and dealing with them. And of course, another preconception is that sometimes people have, higher expectations than they should. That is the opposite. One person's thinking, it's all toilets and bad tenants. And the other person's thinking, this is easy. Anybody could do this. And then they get in trouble, but they dive in and they get in trouble.
Yeah.
So third reason why they don't invest is because they think they're going to lose money.
Mhm.
So obviously my book, or any book that is writing about this sort of subject, is going to talk to you about how to make money and prevent yourself from losing money. And I'll actually add a fourth thing that I didn't really present it as the fourth thing in that particular chapter there, but I will mention it, is that people think that they don't have the money.
Mhm.
And the reality is it's harder to find the deal than it is to find the money.
Yes.
If you can find a deal that makes sense, you will find some way to get the money. And it covers a whole lot of ways to finance property, starting with paying cash and where you might have cash that you don't think that you have or you don't realize you have or can get. Like, for example, a lot of people don't even realize they can borrow without having to worry about paying back against a life insurance policy that has a built up cash surrender value. And it takes us all the way through, conventional financing and that whole thing, and ends up talking about hard money lending, which is what I do, where essentially if you have a relationship with a hard money lender, you're out there making cash offers on property, which are better offers than ones that have, in the eyes of the seller, and ones that have a contingency for financing.
That's right. That's right.
So if you think that you don't have the money, I want to tell you that there's a way that you probably do. I'm not saying for your first property to be $1 million property, but I mean to be able to get started and grow like you should be doing, instead of buying your first property as $1 million property, So
that's a perfect transition into talking about the hard money lending. So, you mentioned that there's a bunch of mindset and preconceptions about investing in income producing rental residential real estate. There's also a lot of views, at least some of them I'm sure are misconceptions about hard money lending, right? Like the fear people have about hard money. Oh, hard money lenders are all like, it's expensive money and they're all sharks and whatever. And you only do it if you're desperate. And, I certainly know many, many people who very successfully used hard money lending as a way to get into the business. So let's start out with the mindset conversation or the misconception conversation around hard money lending. And then I want to delve into, how people properly use it.
Well, yeah. And if somebody said to me, like you were giving an example of somebody thinking that, oh, you only do hard money lending if you're desperate, I would dispute that, because I have regular clients now, that in many cases could use their own money to do what they're borrowing from me, but it's just their business plan that they want to keep their powder dry. In other words, keep some cash on hand for themselves for other things or emergencies or whatever. And so they don't hesitate to call and pay the freight on hard money lending, because there's more to it than just the amount of the points or interest that you would pay. The advantage of the hard money lending is to avoid the underwriting that you would be faced if you went through a bank for conventional lending. I mean, right. I typically lend under one of two circumstances. The first is when the investor is borrowing the money to buy and or rehab a single family home that they're going to sell to a third party who's going to live there, which of course is a flip. The other scenario is when the investor is borrowing the money to buy and or rehab a keeper rental property that the bank wouldn't lend on it the way it is. And they need to stabilize that property, either maybe through a rehab or some sort of increase in the amount of the rents by either changing the tenants or simply getting them to pay more. So they get to the point, usually within a year, that they can present that project or maybe lump it together with two or three others that they've also worked on in the recent year to get conventional financing on the property, and maybe even walk away from that refi closing with, tax-free cash in their pocket, because their appraisal that they got for the refi, even when you take let's say 75 or 80% that the bank would lend you against the appraisal, that 75 or 80% is still more than what you owe your hard money lender.
Right.
Who, helped you. Now, notice I said buy and or rehab. Almost always we're lending 100% of the money to buy the property. I mean, there's no money down. But in some cases, we're also lending 100% of the rehab money. So essentially that investor's in this deal for none of their own money. They typically are paying closing costs and paying the points out of the extra money that they're borrowing over and above the purchase price. Now, naturally, if you're doing a rehab, we don't give you all the money at the closing at one time. That's set up in an escrow account with the attorney. It's a very simple process. Usually 3 or 4 draws, with as you work your way through the project. I just have to know that the money's being spent on that property and not just like you took the money and didn't improve the property, Yeah. So they just say, hey, I'm ready for the next draw. And I said, good, send me a couple pictures. What have you done? And it looks good. I just sent an email to the attorney and they release a check from the escrow account. It's not a big, hard deal or anything like that. But with hard money lending, typically your payments would only be interest and not an amortized loan. And it's a shorter term, though, typically a year. I sometimes do a year and a half if somebody's buying a multi-unit property that we obviously know it's going to take longer to rehab 3 units than it will for just one, like if it was a flip. And also sometimes when they take over rental property, it has tenants in there that they need to kind of waste time removing before they can start the rehab. So like I say, sometimes those are 18. But in each case, what I do is I build in a 6-month automatic extension onto whatever the original length was, a year, year and a half, that is like a no questions asked. If your project's running over, you just get to keep going. You don't need to like apply to get the 6 month or have an excuse or something. So the interest rate goes up though, because I was expecting the money back so that I could lend it out to somebody else and get points and start over again with a different loan. So the interest rate does go up during the extension time.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Mhm.
So, I want to bring a few things you brought together, and it is one of the advantages of hard money lending is that, so every real estate investor I know, you talked about your first property was the only one you bought off of an MLS, right? And every smart real estate investor is looking for off-market deals, right? Because they're not, one of the events, let me take a step back. And, my view has always been, I've talked about this for a lot of years. Unlike investing, for example, in the stock market or, for example, in like big, Manhattan office buildings, whatever, those markets are very, very efficient, very efficient, right? Every dollar's for the most part. I'm not saying there aren't opportunities that people who make money in that, but, residential real estate's a less efficient market, right? Meaning that there are ways if you really learn a market to understand what's undervalued or where the opportunity is or whether there's a landlord who hasn't been taking advantage of things that they can and stuff like that. Well, if you're looking for those deals that are off market, your ability to move quickly, right, not have a financing contingency to get a deal done is huge, right? Because you want to get that deal, that's off market, and you want to be able to say, hey, it's going to be easy for you, seller.
Yeah.
Right. And sure, if you have your own capital and you're willing to use it, that's one way to go. But, going through a traditional lender, you're not going to be able to have speed to close, and you're not going to be able to do it without a contingency. So, that I know a lot of the investors that I know, again, even if they have their own money, like that ability to leverage speed to close. And of course, they're running in the points and the interest and whatever on the short-term loan that's going to take. That's part of their P&L on the project and part of what they're looking at. And they know that they can cover those costs and still make significant money, right?
Yeah. One of the advantages of using hard money is essentially you're making a cash offer like we were talking about. So what does a cash offer mean to a seller? That typically means that they're willing to give you a lower price for the property. So I find that in many cases, the financing costs of using a hard money lender are often made up in the lower price that you pay for the property because you were able to negotiate a lower price and close on it more quickly and get started on the money-making phase of being involved in that project. Because after all, if you're applying for conventional financing, it's going to take you a couple months to maybe even find out after a couple of months of underwriting, the bank says, we can't really do this loan, or we can't do it the way we originally told you we would, the same terms. But in the meantime, you've committed resources and planned for that project to occur. And so it stretches out the amount of time that it takes you to do a project. But with hard money lending, we usually close 2 or 3 weeks after we even find out about the deal. And the way it works with us is that, we have investors out there that are always looking for properties, and they find something and they call me up and we talk about it on the phone. And if it kind of passes muster over the phone, the next step is to just walk the property.
Yeah.
And I use my expertise of having done what they are all doing many, many times. I mean, I haven't lent on a house that I haven't already rehabbed at some point. I don't mean the exact house, but I mean the same type of project,
Right.
And so I'll ask questions about whether they have seen this or whether they're planning for this or what's up with it. And sometimes by the end of the walkthrough, they're absolutely sure they do not want to buy that property. I just had one of those today and one yesterday. I looked at 5 or 6 different properties for different investors, about 4 different investors yesterday. And one of them was, I ain't lending on this one,
Right.
But anyway, so the price that you pay from a dollar standpoint to a hard money lender is usually more than made up in the lower price to pay for it and the shorter length of time for the underwriting. In other words, the extra speed that you can add to your project and then get on to the next one. And obviously, the more projects you do, then the more you're
Sure.
making anyway.
What had you, so the last question before I ask my final two here, what had you make the shift from being, and I'm not saying you're not still, obviously still in property, still investing, but what had you get into the HUD money lending side? Because, obviously for years you were doing the investment, you had your DJ business, et cetera. What had you get into the HUD money lending side?
Well, I was doing both the rentals and the flipping for a while and had gotten a little war chest of money that I was just mainly using myself for if we had a deal come up, And so I kind of have to credit the hard money lending to the guy that wrote the bonus chapter in the book, Real Estate Steve Zumigale, who his mother is the only realtor that I've used. That I mentioned earlier about the realtor. She got into being a realtor after we knew each other for many years when she owned a bridal shop while I was a DJ.
Okay.
We would do bridal shows together. So then she became a realtor about the same time I was starting to flip houses. So anyway, I've known Steve since he was a little guy. And he is very, very successful at this. He's a Ron LeGrand disciple. And in fact, became a coach with Ron LeGrand. But one of the things he learned at Ron LeGrand seminar was how to ask somebody for private money for your real estate deals. And so he came over to my house and had this whole thing prepared with, notebooks and pictures and all this stuff about the past things that he'd done. And he follows the script. I think Ron taught him the script, about asking for the money. And I knew what he was doing. I just sat there and listened to it. And in the end, I said, sure, Steve, I'll give you the money. And I thought about it. I said, and it was a real successful deal. And so somehow other opportunities to do some hard money lending just started coming my way. And within, a year or so of doing it, it was almost the main thing I was doing because the word was getting around and among the investors. And that if you're listening to this and you're in this real estate space here and thinking about hard money lenders, you just need to do some networking in your investor group. I highly encourage you to join whatever local group of like-minded investors you have, whether it's real estate or you're a doctor or you're a retail person or whatever. Get together and brainstorm and get to know each other. And that's who you'll find who to do business with. And that's how off-market deals are made. One investor just sells to the other.
So folks, listen, the book is Build Real Estate Wealth, Enjoy the Journey of Rental Property Investment. And it's also up top, it says the big book on income properties. Check it out. I'm looking at it on Amazon. I'm assuming people can get it in all the usual places. Yes.
Sure. Yeah, there's a website dedicated to the book. It's very simple. It's Joel Miller Books, plural, joelmillerbooks.com. And on there, this is what I would encourage you to do. On the front page, or the homepage of it, you can scroll down. There's a button there that'll show you the entire table of contents. So you can see exactly what you're getting. And it's a detailed table of contents. And there's also a button there that will give you sample writings, like 2 or 3 paragraphs from each of the 16 chapters. So you can see exactly what it is. And then there are several buttons, I call them, that if you just click on, it will take you directly to the page on Amazon where the book is for sale. It's $29.99, and it's an ebook, I think, is $9.99. But you can, follow what's going on with upcoming things that I'm participating with on the website, and also links for things that have occurred in the past, like there will be a link for this podcast eventually. But you can also find me on Facebook and on LinkedIn and Instagram and X. Anytime I'm doing something with an upcoming podcast or whatever, it's always posted on there. Right. So joelmillerbooks.com is JOEL MILLER books.
Excellent. And is there a separate site for the money lending, or do people just?
No, I don't need to have any kind of an online presence for the money lending. I mean, every once in a while on our local Facebook group of investors and might say, hey, I got a little cash available if anybody's got a deal, and by that evening it's gone.
Right. You don't need to promote that you have to be available, right? Like you said, and listen, I do want to highlight before I go to my final question, something you said earlier, which is, and I believe this is true in real estate, this is true in business, that there is always like the perception that, that money's a problem. There's always money for a good deal, whether that's acquiring a company, whether that's acquiring real estate. And if you aren't able to find money for a good deal, then either you're not trying hard enough, not connected, or more likely, what you think is a good deal is not a good deal, actually. So
yeah. I might add that if you're just starting out, you shouldn't expect to just call up a hard money lender and have them give you a couple $100,000 on a handshake, or even $40,000, because that's the way it normally works. But I do that with people that I can see have had some experience, like 2 or 3 deals of getting a project across the finish line. Right. And if they are going to be a landlord with this project, then I want them to belong to the professional organization of landlords that we have in this part of the state that I've been involved with for many years. I want to get to know them, see who they're hanging out with, whether from an investor standpoint, like who are they taking the cues from, as far as what their business model is going to be like.
Yeah.
So early on, you might find that your money for your project might have to come from the seller and not a third party that you barely know. But it won't be long, if you're doing it the right way, that you'll have good relationships with banks and hard money lenders and relatives even that can see that you're being successful.
Yeah, love it. Joel, my final question of the podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom around the world for people from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur my entire life and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
So you've never had a real job either, huh?
Yeah. Well, I did work in big law and medium-sized law for about 5 years, and that's all I could take of it. And then I hung out a shingle at age 30 with no clients and paid my rent on credit cards. So it shows you how much I like working for someone else.
Yeah. Well, unless I count the time I was working in the radio station, which to me was just getting paid for my hobby,
right.
Because I'm a record collector and I was always trying to figure out ways to play music for other people. Yeah, then I've never had a real job yet. But so what was the question again?
Yeah, what does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
Well, yes, freedom means being able to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, wherever you want, and you're a good person when you're doing it. You're, not taking advantage of everybody else and thinking that in order for you to win, somebody else has to lose. I talk about the difference between riches and wealth in the book. And it's important that if you take all this effort and make some money, that you give back to the community and just keep it rolling. It's not just accumulating things and not having good relationships. I am involved with teaching and masterminds and so on. And, you stand up and you talk about things. And I am well known for saying this, and that is that if I had a choice of losing all my money or losing all of my relationships, I would lose my money in a heartbeat.
100%.
Because my relationships will help me get my money back.
Yeah.
And if I had a lot of money and no relationships, what fun would that be? I wouldn't have anybody to enjoy the money with. So, that's what it boils down to for me.
Well, it's interesting you say that, especially because your key relationship in life came from a failed deal, right?
Yeah.
So that sounds totally consistent.
God was watching out for me.
I love it. Joel Miller, thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Corey, I loved it. I hope we can do it again sometime. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. If you are interested in finding out more about my law firm, the services we provide to entrepreneurial and growing companies across industries all over the country, and my partner Brian Megan and I, and my amazing team, just head over to cupforlaw.com. That's cupforlaw.com. And if you want to follow more of my content, head over to my LinkedIn page where I post regularly. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.